Of the Campfire Coaches who just finished Ironman Texas 2 days ago. Adam, how are you feeling?
Tired.
But not sore, you said.
That's the overwhelming feeling. Yeah,
Do you think you're going to do
not really
another
sore or
one?
anything like that. No,
So much,
decisively
so
no.
much truth in that answer. Oh my God. No.
Box has been checked.
Got it. Nice work. Was this one of those like do it before X age kind of thing?
Yeah, I just knew that I was fit enough to do it this year, and that I would really regret not having done it when I had a
Hmm.
chance.
Got it. What are the takeaways for your athletes? Like, what did you learn this weekend that you could then pass on to the athletes that you coach?
So when I'm framing programming and talking to athletes about especially Ironman, I talk a lot about staying in the appropriate perceived effort. And especially on the run, it was very apparent when that perceived effort just ticked up a little too much, pushing over a threshold, and you could feel yourself starting to blow up. And so it was really a potent lesson in keeping that effort in the right spot.
Yeah, no distance other than an open marathon, I think, really like punishes poor pacing more than an Ironman.
Yeah. And even just like being able to feel the slight hills there were in Houston, they weren't big, but they were enough to where you could tell if you did not address the hill before you got there, it was going to
Mm-hmm.
punish you.
Well, we are here to talk about strength training today, and we just did an Ask Us Anything a couple weeks ago. But I think the problem that we see a lot with strength training for endurance athletes is that it just seems really complicated. Why do you think that strength training is so daunting for endurance athletes?
Because we don't differentiate what we mean when we say strength. And so, because that can mean several different things, depending on what we want to get out of it, we say strength training and it doesn't get the message across to athletes. So, they make up what they think that means on their end. And that becomes very taxing, like mentally taxing, especially if your perception of strength is growing muscle mass, which is very difficult to do in general and almost impossible within the context of endurance. It that becomes a hurdle that it seems unable to get over.
What are the different interpretations that endurance athletes have about strength training? Like you just said, they make it up for themselves. So, what are the different applications that you see them doing when we as coaches or other coaches begin programming strength training?
Yeah, so there are some ideas around what strength is, and there are some common pitfalls. In general, we can conceive of strength as either your brain and nervous system's ability to contract a muscle hard. So that's like force production. Can I push on the pedals of my bike at 1,000 watts hard? Or another way to frame it would be, do I have, or does my leg have enough muscle mass to push on the pedal? That would be like muscle girth, actually, how much muscle you have. And then there's also the idea of, can I effectively use the muscle I have, which is generally what we're trying to do with endurance. Is we don't want to build muscle up, more or less, but we want to be able to use the full strength of that muscle tissue. Um, and so some common pitfalls are people like rush their strength workouts and turn them into conditioning workouts. And group fitness is generally considered conditioning, not strength. And I think that's a lot of people's framework for understanding strength is group fitness, where it's let's do a full body circuit, let's take 10 seconds rest, let's get through everything as quick as possible or do as many reps as we can. That is going to burn calories, but that will not create a stimulus for producing
Mhm.
more force.
What is the environment in which we can produce a stimulus for making more force?
It has to be in, unless you have some clever workarounds, you need tension on the muscle tissue that has to physically be loaded. That means you have to lift something heavy. And you have to create a chemical condition in the muscle cell that creates a hormonal change in your body to recover. So it means you have to put subjective effort in, and the load has to also be heavy.
And so you just talked about conditioning, and now we need to define that term. What is conditioning, and how is the environment different than generating strength?
Yeah, conditioning is generally more or less what we're doing in endurance, just on a different scale. So in a group fitness class, conditioning typically is anaerobic conditioning, your ability to repeatedly work your body without oxygen and then recover. And that's how group fitness tends to work, is how quickly can you get we get you to recover from a anaerobic load, and how many times can we then do that versus how much force can I produce.
So it sounds to me that when you're talking about a group fitness class, it's going to be something where there is a lot of reps, not much rest, and probably a moderate load.
Yeah, and I think the key here is when we say not a lot of rest, if I'm giving someone a pure strength routine where like we are trying to increase their ability to produce force in either their arms or legs, we're talking 3 to 5 minutes rest
Mhm.
between sets. Like you're hanging out playing on your phone for 5 minutes before you touch the weight
Yeah,
again.
so it's this kind of thing where getting strong, we don't look like the athlete that we normally are, right? Did you run track in high school?
I
Okay.
did, yeah.
What events? I can kind of guess, but
Yeah, I was a 400,
okay.
800
So
guy.
you're a little more over towards you're one of those weirdos. You're one of those in between types.
Hmm.
You
I'm a really screwed up
Well,
sprinter.
yeah, exactly right. You still had to do probably a fairly high amount of aerobic conditioning to have success at the 800 for sure. But you also probably had to have some real speed to have any success at the 400. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so like that training actually looks a lot like the structure of a group fitness class. We did a lot of high velocity training with very short recovery.
And what? Oh, sorry. Go
So
ahead. Keep going.
like, oh, I was gonna say like a really big workout we would do is as many 200s you could, 200-meter repeats in under 27 seconds with a minute rest.
Okay. Yeah. So we're not quite in Tabata land. We're not quite in 20 seconds on, 10
No, it's
seconds
a little
off.
long, but
But it's a similar model. We are doing
mhm.
we're not actually doing like true anaerobic training at this point. It's actually more like VO2 max.
Yeah.
What were the sprinters doing? What were their workouts like? The true sprinters, the 100 and the 200 people.
The, so what would happen is the 800 guys would take that 200-meter repeat workout, and we'd end up with 20, 30 reps. The true sprinters would end up with 10 or
Yeah.
12 and have to stop.
My memory of the sprinters was that they were like lions, They would like warm up, they would do some stretching, they would do 3 to 5 reps that day, and that's it.
Yeah.
A lot of rest.
Yep.
You can probably see where I'm going with this. Which when we're trying to build
Yeah.
strength, who do we want to emulate?
Yeah. We're the lions, the sprinters, the one big burst of effort to try and
Yeah.
get that stimulus.
And so, if that's what we're after for building strength, how do we get there? I think that's the next complicated thing, right? Is first you have this confusion about what is strength and conditioning. How are they different? Why do they get named in the same term? Why do we call it strength and conditioning?
Yeah.
Because of course, the way that people think is then they lump that together as one unit. So we're talking about strength today, not conditioning. We want to be like the lions. We want to be like the sprinters. How do we get there?
Yeah. It's way simpler than you want to think it is. It's lift something really heavy a few times until you can't lift it anymore.
And
So generally 3 reps, 3 to 5 reps, maybe up to 8, 3 to 5
And how
sets.
much rest in between those sets?
Big rest, 5 minutes at least.
So I
As much rest as you can do without
Ooh,
cooling
I like
off.
that idea. That's a good way to program that. I haven't darkened the door of a gym since last year. Should I drive up to Bend and go to Snap Fitness and put 225 pounds on a squat bar and do 3 to 5 reps today?
That is a dubious proposition because I don't know what
Oh,
your
it's not.
max is. So I don't
It's
know
not
how heavy.
225.
Yeah. No, so like the first 2 weeks of any program is typically all going to be neurologic recruitment. So it doesn't have to be heavy. Like you're going to get the full benefit of lifting heavy from lifting at a perceived heavy, whether or not that is close to your max or not. Because you just, the first couple of weeks, we have to get our nervous system engaged to the muscles themselves. So you'll have really big gains over 2 weeks. And then you'll kind of be in the zone of figuring out, hopefully, you have an idea of what maybe your max lift would be for a squat. And then we can back that off to about 80%.
For how and then do that for a couple weeks, 2 to 3 weeks of that kind of lifting.
Yeah, after about 6 weeks, we would expect
Got it.
a plateau.
Nice.
So you could increase and tighter it in or taper, whatever. You could figure out exactly what you feel like your heavy loads are. And they don't always have to be the same week to week because we're looking at a big range of 60% to 80% of your max, which is a pretty wide window. But, after 6 weeks, we expect start to see a plateau. And every 8 weeks or so, we definitely want to change the stimulus, which may just mean instead of doing a barbell deadlift, we might move to a trap bar deadlift and change the stimulus a little bit, but still do the
Got it.
same movement.
Okay, so yeah, I did want to talk about like programming because I think this is the other thing that endurance athletes bump into. You can find more than a million different programs out there on the internet about programs and things like that. You can go on YouTube, you can see a million variations of similar movements and stuff like that, and some really wacky stuff. Can you simplify programming for us in a way that is going to make sense for coaches and endurance athletes so they know like, okay, what are the movement patterns that will help me the most?
Yeah, for what we do as triathletes, we want a push and a pull from the upper body, typically overhead. Doesn't have to be, but that's a good place to think of. And then a hinging pattern through the hips and a squatting pattern through the hips. And that kind of takes care of most everything
Okay.
we do.
So to me, yeah,
And so that
go
might
ahead.
look
Yeah,
like,
sorry. No,
oh, go on.
I was gonna offer
Uh,
an example,
uh,
but I think that's where you're headed.
yeah, like what my go-to movements are, I do trap bar deadlifts. The trap bar is typically 6 inches higher than a barbell, and so it's easier on your body mechanics wise. And endurance athletes don't typically need to get that low, so it's fine. So a deadlift, and then I like a squat. I typically do a front loaded squat because it
Mhm.
feels safer to me on my body. Um, and then I will do lat pull downs and pull ups, and I will do some sort of push up and row. So I don't actually do much pushing in my programming for myself, but that's because I'm overdeveloped
Mhm.
in that plane. So I push off. I don't try and reinforce that
Yeah, I bet
overdevelopment.
for you, making sure that pec minor is healthy and happy and working effectively,
Mhm.
because yeah, we do use our pec major for swimming, but the limiter is what that pec minor is doing.
Yeah, that
Yeah, yeah,
stabilization.
that's where everybody's hurt, because their pec minors are messed up.
Hmm.
Okay, so we've got these like four basic movements: a hinge, a squat, an upper body pull, an upper body press. Talk to me about core. So the core is this other thing that is just like it's like you said, we need to determine what strength means. My thing when we're always trying to figure out terms is I would really like for us to finally decide what tempo means in terms of endurance training. But yeah, can you tell me a little bit about what core means to you and how we can best address it in this context?
Yeah, so We just described four different core engagement patterns. So people always want to do crunches and sit-ups, and it's like, okay, but you'll get really good at doing a crunch, and that's not very helpful for what we do. Um, in general in life, I do a whole heck of a lot of flexion through my lumbar spine. I'm trying to
Mhm.
target that facetiously.
Yeah, I
It's
know.
not something I ever want to
I
have
was like,
happen.
are you? That doesn't
No,
seem like a
no,
good
like
idea.
for myself, I don't ever do a crunch or a sit up because that is not a movement pattern I want my
Mhm.
body to know. That is how
Yeah.
I'm going to get hurt. Um, so, like, the only specific core work that I do is I really like the ab rollout because I feel like when I'm doing the ab roller, it allows me to engage my lats in a similar way to how I'm on the
Hmm.
bike and swimming. And I'm actually thinking of it more of like a lat engagement movement while I'm doing it than the core, but it does work your core really well as well with it. But what we're looking for here is stabilization through the core. And that means we need a lot of inner abdominal pressure to be built up. The best way I've come up to describe this subjectively is it's going to feel like you're going to poop, but don't. Um, but if you want to come up with an idea of like what it looks like, think of a pop can or a beer can. They're very stable and rigid while they're sealed. You can drive a car over a pop can pretty easily. Um, I mean, I guess you could if it was unsealed too, because you're just pressing on the gas pedal. But the can will hold up. Very rigid. As soon as you open a pop can, it flattens. That is our core as well. Our core is there to stabilize our spine. Our spine will be stable regardless. Your body will figure out how to stabilize your spine in a movement. We want it to do that with our core so that we can use hip muscles and shoulder muscles to do whatever
Mhm.
we're doing. Um, a good example is your hip flexor attaches really far up your spine, like L2. So if you reach in your mid back, it's about where it's attaching and it goes all the way into your leg. So you can take your hip flexor and if you connect your mid back to your leg, you squeeze your spine down like a bunch
Mhm.
of Jenga blocks. That will create stability until you flex your hip and now you've let that go. So that is a bad compensation and that's something people do all the time and get hurt. That's when people say they have tight hip flexors.
Mhm.
That's why is they're not using their core to stabilize their spine. Same thing with your lats. If you're doing a back squat, you should be grabbing the bar and pulling it down into yourself before
Hmm.
you lift it. That's going to use your lats as a spinal stabilizer. It will also help you
Hmm.
engage that core
And
as
breathing
well.
plays a big part in this as well, right?
Yeah, so breathing is the trick because if we do a max lift, we're probably going to
Mhm.
hold our breath. But as endurance athletes, that's not something we want to do when we're on the bike or running. Um, so there's a balance to be had between engaging the core, how hard you engage that pressure, and being able to move that thoracic diaphragm into
Mhm.
your abdomen. And as we get fitter, we get more coordinated and we can actually keep a constant pressure in our abdomen while moving our
Hmm.
thoracic diaphragm through
Got
it.
it. And this is getting super nerdy, I know, but why we might want to avoid the breath holding is that super high amount of pressure, we're eventually going to thicken the walls of the heart, right?
Possibly, yeah. Um, it, in an aerobic
Probably
athlete,
not. Okay. Like there's just
unlikely
not
to
enough
happen.
stimulus to
Yeah,
overcome.
in a strength athlete,
Yeah.
absolutely. Strength athletes will have
Totally.
thick hearts
Yeah.
because of the
Yeah.
pressure they're
Yeah.
building
I
up.
mean, it's another one of those like odd things about being an endurance athlete who does strength is that we want a large heart that has big chambers and flexible skinny walls. But a lifting athlete is also going to have a big heart, but
Hmm.
they're going to have very thick walls because of the pressure that happens during their sport. Yeah, see,
Yeah.
these are the side
Uh,
quests that I was like, don't get involved in these, Chris. Just can't help myself.
yeah, the thing that is going to happen is the aerobic stimulus from all the endurance training we're doing is catabolic in nature. It will break tissue down versus strength is anabolic. So you're not, as an endurance athlete, you're not likely to create so much anabolic stimulus that you would actually grow the
Got it.
tissues of your
That's a
heart.
great segue to our question about when do we do these workouts? When do we do our strength workouts? Not just during the day, that's important too, but also where do we put them in the context of the year?
Yeah, so if we're really trying to build strength, we need to do this while we can deload our aerobic conditioning. The aerobic conditioning is going to make the strength gains slower at best, but very likely non-existent. So we need to be able to go to a place where we are not taxing ourselves aerobically, which is the off season, typically the winter for North American athletes. So in the winters when we want to do that strength, if we're really trying to get work on more force production, we can use these same patterns of movement through the season to create mobility and compliance with our body. So, like, if you're doing heavy squats all winter to build strength, you can continue to do squats in the season. You'll just lighten the load up so it's just a mobility exercise.
And is it a use it or lose it thing? Like, do we need to keep the weight heavy to keep the strength that we gained? Or is it okay if we back it off to, 50, 60, 70% of maximum to maintain what we did in the wintertime?
So, this is where it gets fun because if we've done things appropriately and we've come at the strength from the right idea or the right programming sense, we should be building that strength in our legs if we're looking for more power on the bike in a way that during the season we're using the power on the bike. That load on the bike will actually keep the muscle tissue around. If we were just to sit on the couch, it would go away after a couple weeks. But if we are building that strength up and then using it, it's getting continuous stimulus to
Got
remain
it. So we
around.
don't need to lift as heavy or as often once we're actually into the season.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why we don't wind up with Tour de France climber upper bodies,
Got it. Yes.
right? Because it's not like we're swimming enough to put on
Mhm.
muscle mass, even when we're swimming a lot. So, like, if it was truly a use it or lose it thing, then we would lose our shoulders and upper body almost altogether with how much lower body stuff we do.
Yeah.
And we just don't. And it's because we're using it.
So, final question. A lot of athletes eschew strength training because they're afraid that they're going to bulk up. Please disabuse the world of this notion.
Yeah. So that falls into muscle hypertrophy, which is a very specific stimulus. It's a very difficult stimulus. That getting your muscles to grow in size, not just in strength, but in physical size, is so difficult. There is an entire sport built solely around that principle. We call it bodybuilding. You will not do this. Bodybuilders, while they are in a bulking cycle, when they're trying to put on body mass, limit their aerobic activity to less than 40 minutes a day and typically less than 2 hours a week. So unless we are in that zone of like, I am not doing anything but walking for 30 minutes a day, you're not going to build up muscle
And
mass.
how much do you need to eat to add muscle mass?
Ooh, that is dependent on the person. You need to be in a
Right.
calorie surplus. Uh, so you need to be two things. You need to have a protein surplus and a calorie surplus. You need the calories so your body can run all the processes it takes to build the tissue itself. And then you need the raw material to build the tissue, which is the protein.
And so let's just continue to game this out because it's hilarious. Most of our athletes are going to average about 2 hours of aerobic training a day, right? And let's
Mhm.
slap a average metabolic rate on an hour of aerobic conditioning. This is everybody. Don't add us. What do you think? 750 calories an hour average across the across.
Yeah, if we're averaging out the swimming and the
Yeah.
running, that's probably like 750.
Okay. So and then average basal metabolic rate of a human 2,000 to 2,500 calories a day, something like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
So we're looking at a 3,500 to 4,000 calorie burn a day in order for us to get into that calorie and protein surplus. That's a lot of food.
Yeah. It it's and it's not just if we're trying to actually put muscle mass on, like if we're falling into that
Yeah.
hypertrophy mode, it's not just the gross amount of protein we're eating a day. There's only so much protein you can digest at a time, so it has to be constant. So it means probably every 3 to 4 hours
Oh
you're
my
eating.
God. And this is
And
such an oversimplification because like signaling stuff is happening when you're doing endurance work that cuts off the signaling for the hypertrophy as well. But now we're starting to get a little too in the weeds. But the message we want to communicate, what's the message we want to communicate here?
uh, don't worry about bulking up. It's not going to happen. You're not going to structure yourself in a way that will happen.
Awesome. Any other final things that you want to say about strength training for endurance athletes?
It all falls back into kind of this principle of keeping your core engaged while producing force with a limb. And it doesn't matter if it's swim, run, bike, or lifting. If our core is not cooperating with us, if we're not engaging it well, creating that pressure, we can't produce the force with our limbs.
And strength training provides just such a great opportunity to practice that, right?
And yeah, it slows things down and it gives you a time to stop and repeat. You can feel like if you start to do a lift and you're not engaged well, you can stop it and then think about it, start again until you get it.
Well, that is a great place to end. Thank you. As always, I have gone about 12 minutes beyond what my goal time was, but that's just me. But this is great. We will use this to set it out to the Ask Us Anything people because I stacked up the recording for that. But then, yeah, I'll also get this set up on the web and out to our watchers on social media. Adam, where can people find you?
Uh, I'm on Instagram, and that's about it. Um, I think I don't even know what my Instagram handle is, honestly.
Isn't it like Try Goulet or something like that?
I think it is. I
Yeah.
think it's Triangle.
Well, tell us if we're wrong, everybody. You can also find Adam on the Campfire website. He is one of our coaches. He's available for coaching. He's absolutely amazing at it. And Adam, thanks for taking 30 minutes to chat with us today.
Yeah, anytime.